I got an agent. And I got like a manager. They're like, okay, over on Insta, you talk about like your Renaissance Festival stuff and you're doing like planned stuff. That's okay. But then on Twitter, nonstop D&D. But then you have a Twitch, but you don't play video games, but you're a Twitch partner. I was like, yeah. And they're like, okay. And also, how many subscribers do you have on YouTube? Oh, 40,000. What do you post? I was like, Minecraft videos sometimes. And they're like, what the fuck are you doing? And they're like, well, what do you talk about on TikTok? I was like, ADHD. And kink, and they're like, what? And I'm like watching these people's like brains just melt.
This is Only the Bold, where I have deep, riveting, and fascinating conversations with truly phenomenal humans. I'm your gay, ADHD-having, and compulsively curious host, Gia Goodrich, and among many things, I can't get enough of hearing people's incredible stories and getting inside the way their brains work. Each week, I have conversations where we dig below the surface and really uncover everything it takes to live a truly bold life. Despite the messages we get from media and popular culture, the boldest, truest version of yourself is exactly what the world needs.
Hello. Hi, hey, how are yas? If you can't see me right now and you're just listening with your amazing ears doing whatever it is that you're doing out there in the world, I am, let me just paint the picture for you. I am laying on my back on my couch with a rig set up so that my phone is like directly overhead. So not only is it an incredibly flattering angle, she said sarcastically, but it's also deeply humbling. My back journey has been wild and rocky. And whilst I was feeling really great, I would say last week, there's been a little bit of a turn. And so I am now pulling out all the stops. And I actually have been so humbled that I have been reactivating. It took me a year and a half to get started with what's called the Gupta program, which is like a $400 course, which I bought over a year and change ago. I just couldn't get in it. It's just like so soothing and in the hills of Switzerland, because that's and then we're going to retrain your brain and you're going to meditate. And I was just like, yeah. Like, I'll just be not over here, not able to eat anything because that just does not sound like something I want to do. But she's been humbled. And so I spent the morning digging into it, not even at 2x speed, I will let you know. So I am really like low-key, high-key proud of myself for going through about an hour's worth of content with the soothing voice, the blown out backgrounds of the Swiss hilltops, and just really letting it all sink in because apparently my nervous system needs to fucking chill. So that's what I'm doing. I'm hoping that wherever you find yourself in this moment, that you are just enjoying whatever it is you've got going on, enjoying your body, enjoying your brain, enjoying whatever it is you're looking at, and really appreciating the full scope of life because it is fucking glorious. And somehow I'm able to stay in touch with it, even though I'm hanging out on my back today. But let's talk about this episode. This was such a fun one. I absolutely know you're going to love it because this was like such an emblematic conversation of what happens when you get two powerhouse ADHD having queer babes together to talk about all of the things. We talk about kink. We talk about gaming. We talk about mental health. We talk about burnout. We talk about exciting things that happen when you have this skyrocket level of success. No matter where you're at, what your goals are, what you're doing, I know there's going to be something in it that resonates with you. This guest is just fucking fabulous. We decided we were going to be friends in real life because she is just the jam and the peanut butter and the bread all at the same time. I will see you on the other side of this episode. I fucking love you, and let's roll into it. Today's guest is a breath of fresh air in the deluge of media content that we are consistently experiencing. They are a human that is creating content and has amassed almost 2 million followers by being genuinely herself, showing up, talking about the subjects that she believes in, and building a community of people who feel validated, who feel empowered, who feel educated because of that. They are multidisciplinary AF. After getting 2 master's degrees in Shakespeare, having a whole lifetime of working in production and theater, She transitioned in the pandemic to becoming a full-time content creator, teaching about the incredible intersection of kink, sex, tabletop role-playing games, queerness, and neurodivergence. She and her work has been featured all over the place, including the New York Times, Cosmopolitan, GQ, Medium, Mashable, Bustle, InStyle, and that's just to name a few. She is the co-host and creator of one of the top podcasts in mental health, Katie and Eric's Infinite Quest, an ADHD adventure, which is such a breath of fresh air and fun. I highly, highly recommend. And on top of being one of the most sought after content creators in 2021 and 22 and beyond, they are also one of the most deeply humble, generous, and fabulously honest humans I have ever met. The flamboyantly forgetful and infinitely interesting, bold soul, Cate Osborn, aka Cateosaurus.
I mean, after that introduction, how can I possibly measure up? But thanks for having me. I'm calling dibs. My autobiography is just going to be called Cateosaurus, the shit showery. And it'll be great. That's just it. That's done now. I don't have to decide.
Yeah, you're welcome. And you don't even have to put a dedication to me, just like little footnotes in there. Will be perfect.
Just like dedicated.
Let's talk about the ADHD of it all, because I think one of the things that's so impactful and amazing in your content is the fact that not only are you sharing your experience, the way your life works, but you also really teach and frame a lot when it comes to neurodivergence in a way that helps people with those brains kind of say like, oh, I had never heard of this thing. And maybe that's why I'm showing up this way over here. How did you come? Because I know you're a late diagnosis human, right?
I mean, my diagnosis story is wild. It is a wild tale. So on September 1st, like, I guess 4 years ago now, 3-4 years ago now, I woke up and I was having really bad cramps. And I was like, oh man, I'm having really bad cramps. And I didn't think anything else of it. And then I started feeling like worse and worse and worse throughout the day, to the point where I finally, and I never go homesick from work because I never do, but I was like, I gotta go. So I was laying on my bedroom floor and I was like, this is the worst cramps I've ever had in my entire life. Do I go to the urgent care? Do I not go to the urgent care? Like, what should I do? And so finally I was like, okay, I should probably go to the urgent care. So I go to the urgent care. And also, important to the story, it is also my husband's first day of work at a new job. And so I didn't call my husband because I was like, I didn't want to bother him. I didn't want to freak him out on his first day because he's autistic. And so changes to routine are already really difficult. And I was like, I don't need to also tell him that I'm going to the doctor. It'll be fine. So I go to the urgent care and they take my temperature and she kind of looks at it. She's like, that's not right. She takes my temperature again. They took my temperature 3 times. My temperature was 94 degrees. And this is the last thing I remember before passing out in the urgent care. And and thankfully the urgent care was in the parking lot of the hospital that I went to. But it was very embarrassing because I woke up being driven across a parking lot in an ambulance, wee woo and everything happening. And I'm like, oh my God, this is so embarrassing. So I go to the hospital and I'm just crying in pain. And I've never felt this bad in my entire life. And nobody can figure out what's going on. I'm just like, it feels like I'm having cramps. I don't know what else to tell you, but this is awful. The lady who was doing the ultrasound, she's supposed to go home early that day. Her kid had a birthday party to go to. I was laying in the gurney on the hallway and she was bitching about how she was so mad that she had to do this one last stupid ultrasound. She was going to be running late to the party and whatever. And so they wheel me and I'm like, I'm so sorry. I hate to hold you up. She's like, it's fine. We'll just get it done. And so she's giving me the ultrasound and then she just stops. She just kind of freezes. And she goes, how long have you not been feeling well? And I was like, I don't know, probably since 9 or 10 this morning. And it was at that point that she very calmly, very carefully, just put down the little ultrasound one. And then she walked out of the room. And then all I heard was just running footsteps, just fucking sprinting down the hallway. A team of people come running into this room. And they're like, we're taking you to emergency surgery. You're dying. We need to go right now. Because it turned out that I had an ovarian torsion. And my ovary had twisted around inside of me. The circulation had been cut off. And it had died. And so I was in early sepsis. and it was not
my
good.
God.
So I had to awkwardly call my husband because it's like hour 6 of being in the hospital. And I was like, hey, so FYI, I am going into emergency surgery. I probably am not going to die. Have a good rest of the day at work. I'll see you later. And then they took me into surgery and I woke up and I felt much better when I woke up.
One would hope after removing a part of you that's dying.
That was actually the beginning of my ADHD diagnosis story because I had no idea that ADHD is dramatically linked to hormones. When I had my ovary removed, the hormones in my body shifted so much that I went from being like functional, but like, you know, I'm a little disorganized. Oh, I'm always a little scattered to like, I could not function. Like I could not function. And I was terrified. I had no idea what was going on. And that is also a very important and sort of key part of my story is because I had no idea what was going on. I luckily have a friend who also has very bad ADHD and depression. And he looked at me and he was like, well, have you ever been evaluated for ADHD? And I was like, I mean, I have 2 master's degrees. I was an amazing student. Like people have told me my whole life that there's no possible way that I could have ADHD. So I went to go get evaluated. And I lucked out. I have the best psychologist in the entire world. And she is also a burnt out, gifted kid with ADHD and anxiety. And so she, I think, saw a lot of her own journey in me. The diagnostic process was very quick and very simple for me, which I got so privileged and so lucky to have that. So the very, very long-winded tale is the answer to your question is the reason why I started teaching and the reason why I started talking was because from day one, I had no idea that things like hormones affected your ADHD. I had no idea that people with ADHD were more likely to have like PMDD. I had no idea that, you know, and on and on and on and on. And the more that I talked and the more that I sort of started talking about these things that I hadn't known, I started realizing like how many other people didn't know it either. You know, they had no idea. And so then I just got mad. I just got really mad and really frustrated because I was like, this is bullshit. Like, this is absolutely bullshit that we're still talking about ADHD like it's this little kid thing that, you know, 7-year-old boys deal with in the back of the classroom when it's so much more profound than that. And now I'm here. So.
Wow.
It was such a long story. I'm so sorry.
No, I'm so fascinated because everybody's ADHD origin story is different. But I think that there's something really surprising to a lot of people who aren't familiar with it about the sort of clandestine folks, right? And like I was somebody like that too, where everybody always saw greatness in me. And because I was so good at manipulating my environment and the people in my environment, I like totally missed it. And then by the time I finally did get diagnosed, you know, the person who was administering, you know, the psychologist was just like, I've never seen it be this pronounced and go undiagnosed for this long, which is validating, but also like so fucking scary because you're like, what? Like all of a sudden I'm supposed to have this new framework and what does that even mean? And how am I in this group with people? And I remember thinking this at the time, like, how am I in this group of people that I feel like our stories are so misaligned? And yet I'm somebody who's supposedly demonstrating this. And then, of course, as you figure out that it's not this model of like little 7-year-old boys breaking things and, you know, with limbs that won't sit still, that it also has these other presentations. It became really like a freeing thing to have that diagnosis.
I had kind of the same thing, but I think that I very admittedly, I sort of like approached it from like a not positive standpoint at first because I was just so angry.
Yeah.
Because I was like, how did they miss it? How did everybody in my life miss how much I was struggling? And then I realized it was kind of exactly what you said. It was because I was really good at manipulating my environment in order to like set myself up for a modicum of success, you know, fly by the seat of my pants, but still, you know, whatever. For a while, I felt like finding out that I had ADHD like invalidated a lot of the work that I had done. It's a really weird way of thinking about it, but I think that I had really struggled with like self-esteem and like my self-worth for so long that for me, hearing you have ADHD invalidated this sort of like idea that I had of myself as this very like capable, very like put together person. And rather I was like, oh, so all of the places where I was struggling, all of the places where I had like invested my self-worth, all of the places where I had like just decided that I was never going to be good enough and all of it, I was like, it was fucking ADHD. That's like, and then I was like, cause I always have to overcomplicate everything. And so I was just like, well, that's not even fun and exciting, you know, like I had to work really hard, especially at the start, to like really let go of my anger and let go of my frustration, but also let go of that sort of like internalized like ableism and invalidation that I felt in order to really start to grow and start to like learn and start to like accept myself for my faults and my failings, as much as the places that I took a lot of pride in, like, I'm so good at working under pressure. I'm so good at being stressed out. Like, I'll stay up till 5 a.m. every night to get the And I'm like, that's not healthy. That's right. ADHD. That's not healthy. That's not something to be proud of. It was so interesting realizing how much of my self-worth I had invested in these unhealthy coping mechanisms.
I was lucky in that the first ADHD specialist that I worked with, aside from the one I was diagnosed by, Dr. Upoff, I fucking love him and I'm so sad that he retired. He helped me frame it in such a beautiful way that made me realize that my capability was, and you know, who knows if he was just like, you know, feeding me in a way to like make me feel better about myself so I could actually function after the diagnosis. But he was just like, if you think about what you have achieved, despite a world that's not set up for you, your capability must be like 10 times more than this person over here, right? And I was just like, okay, I'm gonna like rock with that, right? And that was something, even though I didn't know how to put words to it for the longest time, I knew that things were harder for me than other people, even though the outcome ended up being the same. I would get all the support like late at night with stuff, like my mom would be helping me do things. And then we always laugh because in school, so I actually had like 9 grandparents. If you put together all of the like, I have a bonus mom by marriage, I have a good dad, I have, you know, my grandparents, they married and then got divorced and all these sorts of things. So at one point I had 9 grandparents that were all living. And going through high school and then college, I think I had talked about the death of a grandparent probably like 30 times. So I had like staged a death in order to get extensions on things, to be able to provide myself the accommodations that I needed in order to thrive or just like survive. In hindsight, I'm like, oh, like that was totally like the way I was able to level the playing field because I didn't have all this terminology or anything like that. But I also felt like so guilty that I remember looking at this one teacher who will remain nameless and like walking up to him and just like bawling in class. And he was like, what's going on? And I was just like, I'm sorry. I don't mean to throw this on you, but I just had my grandparent die and blah, blah, blah. And like the emotions were so convincing because they were real emotions from being overwhelmed and burnt out.
Yeah.
And like all of this stuff that he ended up giving me like a 2-week extension. And then I was able to get the paper in and still get an A.
I mean, that was very nice of him.
Yeah.
I don't know if I ever killed off a grandparent. I think I know that I killed off a fictitious aunt in college at least once. I think I like always actively avoided killing off a grandparent because it's like everybody kills off a grandparent. So I was trying to be like more creative.
Well, the thing is, I probably shouldn't have because now all 9 of my grandparents are dead. So not to take personal responsibility for it, but
oh no,
you know, like in a condensed time period, it was like, well, I rehearsed for this moment, but now it's like the boy who cried wolf because nobody's gonna give me anything because but we love them. Good vibes. So one thing that I do want to talk about is like some of these aspects of ADHD that are lesser known that in your like talking about and teaching about, you've had people that are just like, what? This is a transformational concept and puts words to what I've been doing and blaming myself for this whole time.
I have my top 5, like, because I literally like analytically know the top 5, but it's the fact that your period, if you're a person who gets a period, your monthly cycle absolutely affects ADHD. That is one. I post about that every month, which is, by the way, if you watch my content, that's how you know. You're like, oh, okay, that's where we're at in the month right now. But that's what I do. That's like my reminder to myself to like do it. But that's a huge one. But along with that, along with like the hormonal shifts that can dramatically impact how ADHD affects you and the severity to which it's impacting your day, is also like sexual dysfunction and disappointments, which is one of the reasons why I became a certified sex educator. I talk a lot in general, very broadly about ADHD on TikTok, but because TikTok is what we will call perhaps not the most friendly to sexual wellness and educational content, but it's fine to just have people dancing in their underwear. It's fine. I'm not mad. I'm not mad about it at all. I'm super mad all the time about it. But it's one of the reasons why I became a certified sex educator, because there are really not a lot of people talking about neurodivergency in conversation with like sex and relationships. And my sort of like special interest in that world is making kink and like the BDSM community like more accessible for neurodivergent and disabled people. And I love it. It's a really cool sort of like little branch, and like kink and stuff has always been really important to me. And so getting to like educate and advocate for my community in that already amazing community has been really gratifying.
I'm super fascinated by this whole world. Coming as somebody like on the podcast, they know that like I am somebody who like has a really hard time talking about sex. Like it just is like uncomfortable for me. I've loved in your content talking about that relationship where if your head's not in the game, it's not negative, unexpected thing. It can definitely be attributed to the fact that you have ADHD and things like that. But I would love to hear more like about your personal experience. You have like 2 partners, right?
I do.
I would love to hear more because I'm just so fascinated. The first thing I think of when I think of that is like, there's no way I can manage that schedule. There's no way that I could like make that work. I would be forgetting shit all the time. So yeah, I would love, just like hearing more about your personal experiences and how that all kind of shakes out for you.
I shall try to be brief but there's like a lot of backstory. Again, there's always like a weird amount of backstory in all of my stories. I'm like, that's a good story, but here's 45 minutes of context first. But for me, like I was raised in a very conservative, very religious home. I went to private school my entire life. I literally just told the story on another interview the other day, so it's like fresh in my mind. But basically, like my sex education basically involved like if you have sex before marriage, you will burn in hell. You are a terrible, disgusting person, and God won't love you anymore. Was basically what we were taught. Like that was our version of sex ed.
Not traumatized at all.
Yeah, well, and also like as a young queer kid who like really didn't know much about my body or sex or sexuality or how any of that worked. I remember very specifically going to my mom when I was about 12 and saying, Mom, I think I'm a lesbian. And my mom looked me in the eye and she said, no, you're not. It's a phase. And I was like, oh, well, she's my mom. She must know better than me, you know? And so then it just stayed a phase for, 20 years until finally I was like, Mom, I'm just going to be real honest with you. I'm bi. Like, it's just, that's not going to change. Like, it's not a phase at this point. I'm pretty sure. Like,
yeah.
So there's been that, right? But so like all of that, like my foundational understanding of sex, my foundational understanding of like sexuality and intimacy was very much grounded in shame. It was very much grounded in body negativity. If there's an opposite of body positivity, it was that. It was shame is that, my body is meant to be, hidden, and like even very healthy things like, masturbation. Masturbation is canonically a sin in the Catholic Church. And so all of this guilt, all of this shame, all the time. And then as an adult, like when I really started looking at my life and looking at my relationships and looking at the places where I don't even say saw room for improvement, but just realized that there were like gaps, there were gaps in how I talked about sex. There were gaps in my ability to ask for what I want and articulate a need. I just got really interested in it. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. And so that was kind of at the time when I very much accidentally stumbled into the kink community. And I was very lucky in that I had very supportive friends who took very good care of me, which is not always the experience.
Yeah.
But I had some really good friends who kind of like took me to, the first couple of like kink events and that kind of stuff. And I fell in love with it. And the reason why I fell in love with it, and it's always really funny because sometimes I go and people expect these like salacious stories. And I'm like, I have some very funny stories that have happened in like assorted dungeons. But like, honestly, for me, it's like, it's not about the sex. It's not about the power dynamics or anything like that. For me, the reason why I fell in love with kink and the reason why I'm such a big advocate for the kink community is because it was the first time that I felt connected to my body. Like I'd always kind of thought of myself as like a floating head with legs attached that I used to get around. But I never really thought about how things felt or what I enjoyed or what I didn't enjoy. And so all of a sudden there was like this safe space, this place where I could exist as a whole person, as a whole body, but be absolutely in control of everything, like even as somebody who identifies more, like I'm a switch, which means I will sometimes feel like being dominant, sometimes submissive, and I lean more submissive than dominant, but like with healthy, safe, negotiated kink, the sub is the one who has the ability to say no, so like I was always safe, I was always in control, and I was allowed to take things at my own pace. And so I loved that. I loved that. I loved getting to have that and having that as a part of my life, and really just for the first time feeling connected to my body and feeling like I had this space where like I was allowed to be sexual and I was allowed to experience intimacy, and I was allowed, and this is the most important thing, to ask for what I wanted.
Yeah. I don't have as much familiarity with the kink community, but in my understanding and conversations around kink and also around polyamory is that there is this emphasis on communication and really honoring what's coming up for you. And so it seems like there's this beautiful acceptance and resonance and boundary setting that we're all trying to figure out like how to do that after having been socialized in like the worst way when it comes to any of that stuff. You would know better than me, but it seems like because that's like so at the forefront of everything, that you are able to show up more as your full self than these sort of faceted aspects of engagement with humans. Sex for me, for the most of my sexual history, has been almost exclusively performative, where it's like, I want to be the seductress and blah, 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 which meant that I was like faking orgasms like 99.9% of the time. So it seems like that like full body acceptance and permission and embracing like who you are seems like that would be amazing.
In conversation with embracing who I am, as I started learning more about ADHD, I found a way to make it educational. But as I started learning more about ADHD and like working to understand the ADHD brain, one of the things that I learned was that about 40% across the board, doesn't matter what gender you are, about 40% of people with ADHD struggle with some type of sexual dysfunction or disappointment. Mm-hmm. And for me, and in my experience, it like just the checklist, I was just like, oh, that and that and that and that. But for a lot of people with ADHD, that looks like really struggling to get aroused, struggling to be in the mood, especially struggling to get in the mood, like if you're doing something and then, your partner's like, hey, and you're like, I'm doing the dishes, man,
Yeah.
And then even past that, like getting distracted during sex, not being able to, like for people with penises, things like, not being able to maintain an erection, that kind of thing, because it's a focus thing. It's a headspace thing, and then, just like struggle to orgasm, delayed orgasm, all of that kind of stuff. And then there's also, the other side of the coin, which is that, a lot of people also experience hypersexuality, mm-hmm. which comes with its own little like basket of issues in terms of like risk-taking behavior and what, I don't like the word promiscuity, but it's weird that that's what like shows up in the studies about it, is like promiscuous behavior, STIs, pregnancies, like that kind of thing. So we see these sort of like two worlds of people with ADHD where sometimes sex is all that they can think about to the point of they're making dangerous choices, or they forget that sex exists, and it's really hard to enjoy and focus and embrace the moment.
Yeah.
And when I started realizing that, I started like sort of, connecting the dots. It was like, Charlie with all the yarn on the wall. Always sunny. It was like that. I was like, ADHD and kink. Holy shit, it makes so much sense. Because kink is a very like sort of unique thing in that it is purely based on sensations. It is purely based on the experience of experiencing a feeling or a sensation or whatever. And a lot of people always try and trap me when I say that. And they go, the power dynamics, power dynamics. Like that's not sensation. I'm like, my friend, if you are submissive and you're giving yourself to your dom for that evening or however you like to phrase it, what you're looking for is a feeling of safety, the sensation of safety, the sensation of comfort, the sensation of trust, the sensation of intimacy, the sensation of satisfaction from service. Like, it is still about experiencing sensation. I'm always really careful in that I'm not like, come join my kink cult, because that's not what I'm about. But as a sex educator, I think that there's a lot of value and a lot of potential in just like very, very basic sort of like kink stuff, It's like, you don't need to go to the dungeon. You don't need to like, have like crazy sex parties in your basement. But like, if you're a person with ADHD and you really struggle with focus, like a blindfold, just a moving, visual stimulation. And for some people, that's as kinky as they get. And I'm like, more power to you. You tried something out of your comfort zone and that's rad,
Yeah.
But for other people, especially more experienced players and that kind of thing, like they want something more extreme, they want something more intense, and that's also okay. But yeah, like it's so funny how sometimes I always manage to talk about kink and make it the most boring and least salacious thing ever. I'm like, yeah, well, like once you've got your like homework done and you've written your report about your likes and your dislikes and you've had a 3-hour negotiation session, then, you can think about maybe having sex. It's great.
Right. I feel like most things are kind of like that. Once you peel back the curtain, if people are operating from like an ethical, honest place, there's usually all of like the boring stuff that has to happen, which is interesting to me in thinking about sex and intimacy, because it like flies in the face of every narrative we've ever been told about how people should interact, where it's like, oh no, you need to read between the lines, and oh no, like all of, all of this stuff. And I've even had like sexual partners that like the idea of communicating about it was not a part of like their framework for how it would ideally be. It was like we were just supposed to like mind meld and sense each other, and that should just be amazing. And I was like, I don't think that's how my body works. So I'm just going to create a performance so that you feel like this really worked well, which of course is, suboptimal.
I tell this joke all the time, but I'm like, I really believe in my soul that if we weren't sold a completely counterintuitive version of what love looks like by the media, like in movies and TV and kind of stuff, like 90% of all relationship issues would just be solved. Like they would just be gone. They would disappear. They would cease to be a problem. But the problem is that movies and stories and generally anything that isn't real life has to have conflict, has to have drama, or it's not interesting. Like we don't watch Pride and Prejudice because like they sit down and they have a frank conversation about their feelings. We watch Pride and Prejudice because we like to watch Mr. Darcy brood until they fall for each other, right? But it's deeply unhealthy. And this idea that like to be in love is to read a mind, to be in love is to intrinsically know immediately and without discussion or question or clarification even, that you know exactly what a person wants, that you know exactly what they need, that you know exactly how to treat them. That is what love looks like. And then on the other side of that, if you don't have that, if you have to ask for what you want, or you have to like tell them where to put their hand because that feels better than where it was before, if you have to like ask for affirmation, if you have to say, hey, I really need to hear you say I love you, it counts for less. It doesn't mean as much. It must not really be love, because otherwise they would just know. And so it must not be love. They must not be the right partner for us. And I'm like, that's so exhausting.
That's the thing too, like with relationships and like going back to ADHD, although I know it exists in all types of relationships,
The way that I explain it is that I'm a deeply thoughtful person. Like if you think about what thoughtful means, I think about what a person might need, what would make them feel good, whatever. However, when we use the term thoughtful, what we mean to say is that you have actively demonstrated that caring consideration with some sort of act that lets me know that thing. And to me, like that's the chasm where everything falls out. So it's like, I thought about sending you this amazing birthday card where I wrote X, Y, and Z, X, Y, and Z. And the people luckily in my life who know me really well and have been my friends for a long time, like that's enough for them because they get it. But especially like with partners, it's taken a really long time for people to understand that I need to be reminded of things. And I'm not gonna, just be able to intuit whatever, because I'm also autistic. So it's like, I can't like necessarily intuit whatever it is you need. And my reaction is very different. And that can just be like such a tough thing to negotiate when the idea of love or just relationships is about anticipating what somebody's needs are.
It's so true. And I think like you'd mentioned it earlier, but like I do have two partners. I'm married to my lovely and wonderful husband, Chris. And then I have a non-nesting partner who is Eric, and he's who I do my podcast with. Mm-hmm. And we do like content and stuff together. And so for me, it was really interesting, like sort of like as I moved to a person, like from like one partner to two partners, it was really interesting, like really thinking about how I love and why I love and why relationships and intimacy are important to me, and how often in my life I was not asking for what I wanted, not asking what I was needed. I was faking the orgasm, I was doing the performance. I'm an actor, like performance is the safest thing for me, because if I'm performing, I the words are written down for me in a script and someone tells me where to stand.
Mm-hmm. And there's a separation between you and the performance. And so there's like a kind of safety there because it's an avatar.
The safety of scripts, like never underestimate the safety of scripts, I was doing so much performing, but I wasn't like authentically showing up for myself. I wasn't showing up for my needs and that kind of thing. When I found myself in a place where I was like, I love two people and I love them very differently in vastly different ways. And I support them and they support me in vastly different ways. But a lot of that is, again, very boring. It's not salacious. Everybody always wants the like crazy sex party stories. And I was like, listen, all I have is Google calendars and we're always out of milk. That's what my life is like. It's really not as exciting as it seems. But for me, it is the most authentic way to love. Because I really do believe that like love is not finite, and my partner, Chris, has a secondary partner as well. I love that. I love that for him. I love that somebody else gets to love Chris. I love that he gets to be loved and experience love by other people. It's a lot of just, I think, unpacking what our preconceived notions are and how things are supposed to be communicated and what things are supposed to look like. And ultimately sort of like arriving, at least in my journey, of realizing that there's no one right way to love. There's no one right way to have a relationship. There's no way of being in a relationship that is more or less valid than another person's. And so I had to really work to let go of a lot of stuff before I was in a place to really be in any relationship, let alone, two at the same time. It's been a really rewarding process of growth and honestly like accountability, personal responsibility, and just realizing that like, yeah, no, a lot of times I'm the asshole and I'm the problem, and that can be really hard to admit, but sometimes I'm just the asshole.
Yeah. I mean, in my case, it's like the majority of the time, although I am working on it.
I mean, that's all you can do, right? Like you can't magically just decide like to never be the asshole, because that's not how life works. And I think that a lot of people do that. They just go, I shouldn't be an asshole. It's like, yeah, don't be an asshole. But sometimes you might just have to be for whatever reason,
Yeah. Well, and I think like that type of self-love that I'm certainly trying to cultivate is like honoring the fact that I am both the asshole and the super kind, loving, considerate person simultaneously. And then just at whatever point, different traits might emerge that demonstrate all these things. but all I can do is like my best to try to bring it around to the type of loving energy I want to be showing up with, but like honoring the fact that I don't always have the capacity to do that. And then in those moments, I'm not very nice. And then I apologized.
Oh yeah, that's the thing, is being able to apologize. Like that's really important. My ADHD affects like how I process like a lot of the emotions that I am experiencing. Because a lot of times I'll get really, really mad and then I'll get distracted because the dishwasher needs to be unloaded. And so then but it's weird. And I have this like moment of like putting that anger on pause and be like, all right, the dishes. And I'm like, wait a second, I was mad at you. And so I do that. And so if there's a thing to like about having ADHD, it is that often inadvertently, like I don't do it on purpose, but inadvertently, sometimes the distractibility and the sort of like sensation seeking of ADHD gives me the opportunity to step back and say like, okay, like I was angry. I was reacting from a place of anger. I was being the asshole, but like I unloaded the dishwasher and I had to think. Like there are places that I find where it like actually weirdly helps me support my emotional needs as much as it like then absolutely contributes to like the mess that is my emotional needs.
Yes. But I mean, I definitely relate with that. But I feel like there's a lot about ADHD that I fucking love. Are there other things for you that you like love and are excited about? Or is it mostly kind of like a meh scenario?
I will be very honest and say that I think the idea, and I don't know what you believe, so this might be awkward for a second, but like I really struggle with the idea that ADHD is a superpower, just because like I feel like it invalidates a lot of the struggle. I think that it sets people up to compare, you know, like, well, this person thinks that their ADHD is a superpower and I really struggle with mine. So am I wrong? You know, like that kind of thing. The intentions behind it are so good, but I think that it is far more ultimately hurtful and divisive than anybody ever makes it out to be. It's fun. ADHD is a superpower. Like, yeah, it's frustrating. But it's like, also, have you ever read a comic book? Like having superpowers is isolating and hard. And a lot of times it like deeply impacts relationships and it makes people superheroes, you know, it's harder for them to have meaningful and real relationships.
So I am one of those people that frames it as a superpower, but that is exactly how I mean it. Not that like it's all sunshine and rainbows. And the way that like I kind of frame it is like, if you look at Superman, for example, he has this huge kryptonite thing. You can like point it at him, totally neutral substance to everybody else. And it's just like, boom, down, withering away in the corner. And so to me, like looking at the dynamic of superpowers in general means that it's a double-edged sword that other people don't have.
I love that.
So to me, it's like I can do things and approach situations and circumstances in a way that somebody else will not be able to. And also my reaction to seemingly neutral circumstances and situations.
You're like, fuck, overhead lighting.
Yes. Laundry. Like just like,
right?
Yes. Have you seen the emotional damage sound where it comes from?
Oh yeah.
Where it's like hit by a leaf. It's this TikTok, we'll link in the show notes, which is like really great, where they're talking about video games and that they had to add an Asian level because the video game was too easy. So then this player is playing and it's like, what happened? I died. And it's like, oh, there was a stick. Oh, you got hit by a leaf. And then the last one is when the avatar dies, it's like emotional damage. Yep, that can take you out of the game. And to me, that's what I feel like. Like my superpower is awesome in certain circumstances, but it also makes me like so fucking fragile when it comes to things that like other people are just like, really? And I'm like, yep. Like just crumble, crinkle up into a ball. Yes. And for me, like honoring that has been like a journey that I've really tried to like own, because it sucks to say to someone, like this was a conversation with my then partner, you know, that we've had so many years where it's like, as much as I love you, as much as I know that this thing is important to you, as much as I want to show up in whatever, like it will be game over if the expectation is for me to contribute with the laundry. That sounds silly. That sounds stupid. That sounds whatever. But like that is literally the facts of the situation.
Sounds incredibly valid to me is what that sounds like.
Right. Yes. Well, that was the inner dialogue that I had, and which is a whole nother can of worms, I think. But yeah, like having that grace For me, what helps is like not just feeling like it's all negative, but honoring that there's a huge like shadow aspect of it that is just so much harder than other people can grasp. But there is also this part of it that like I can lean into that does make me magnetic in a way that other people might not be.
Yeah, I mean, that's my thing. I got fixated on the superhero thing and I forgot to actually answer your question. Oh, I said, what else do you like about ADHD? I'm like weirdly sentimental about it too. It's just funny. But I mean, I think what it is for me is the fact that my ADHD has made me inherently curious about the world in a way that like I don't meet a lot of other people who get it, though, you know, which is why I like you so much, because I'm like, oh my God, you get it. But it's like, you know, and I think a lot of it has to do with hyperfocus and hyperfixation, because it's like, you know, I wake up one day and I'm like, how the fuck do they make combs? Which is a real thing. I really like, you know, and then the next day it's like, you know, oh my God, where do they put the carriages in Elizabethan England? Like where did they have garages, you know? And so it's like things like that where like I have had so many experiences, so many opportunities, so many things that I have done and gotten to do that nobody else in the world. Like I got to perform at the Kennedy Center, which is not a thing that a lot of people know about me because I never talk about it. But like I performed an original slam poem that I wrote about the inauguration of John F. Kennedy. So they had a celebration for like the 50th anniversary of the inauguration of John F. Kennedy, and they asked me to come perform. And so I did this poem that I had written, and it was because I spent 6 months like really into like spoken word and like slam poems and like that kind of thing. And so like I got good at it, and then I got to meet like presidents, you know.
Oh
and
my gosh.
it's right. It's weird.
Yeah.
And so, but like all my friends, like very facetiously, they call them Cate Osborn stories because like, oh, do you need somebody who has a story about like stealing a yacht? Like, yeah, Cate probably has 3, you know?
Right.
And it's like one of those things where it's kryptonite, you know? It's like laundry is one of my kryptonites, you know? Like fucking responding to text messages is kryptonite. But like also I learned how to make fishing nets last night. Like I got bored and I was like, that seems like a cool thing because you just take the yarn and you do a little loopy and it makes a net. And I thought that was interesting. And so it's just stuff like that, you know, where it's just like, I'm so grateful for, as heartbreaking, you know, as it can be, like when that moment of like hyperfixation wears off and you're like, oh, this thing no longer brings me joy. Like I always feel that like a loss for that. I always feel a grief for that. I still remember the day I woke up and realized that I didn't care about Harry Potter. My entire life changed that day. Because, like, for real, you know, I was like 14 and I was like, oh, shit, you know? And so, like, that is what I think ADHD has given me. I think, like, as frustrating as it has also allowed me to learn about the world, learn about myself, learn about how things work, learning about how, like, people work, you know, that kind of thing. And it's also given me a reason to keep educating because it's like, today I'm really into making fishing nets, but tomorrow, you know, I might get excited about ADHD and whatever, and I get to teach more people about that, you know? And so yeah, it really is a double-edged sword. I like that you said that. It really is a double-edged sword.
Yeah, I totally relate to that. I'm curious what some of your other deep dives are, because I remember, so when I graduated from my master's program, I had spent 6 months before that writing a thesis in this really rigorous program, all like had this myopic focus, attention, and energy. And then, of course, you graduate and you're like, well, what the fuck?
What do I do with my life?
Yeah, exactly. So I had all this energy and nowhere to put it. So I ended up putting it in compulsively watching documentaries, fixating more specifically on venom and the repurposing of venom. And in that rigorous study, I learned that like there's all different types of venom and how it's used, and like the Komodo dragon. We thought for the long time that they had bacteria in their mouth and that's what was killing people. Nope, they have venom sacs. And so it's like I know about Dr. Fry in Australia and all of this stuff. And to me, it's like this delightfully random thing. It's just like this bucket of random factoids that I can just like pop out at any moment. And, you know, of course, like you said, at one point it wore off and it was just like, oh, there's nothing left. Okay, whatever. But then it goes somewhere else. And like right now, I have a lot of things that I could be doing, arguably should be doing, but I am focused on learning Korean because it was a circuitous, meandering route to me deciding, yep, this is what it's going to be. And I honestly, I don't know how long it's going to last. It would be great if it lasted long enough for me to actually, like become proficient in the language. But this morning, as I was doing all this stuff, I was like listening to Pimsleur, and it was just like, 안녕하세요. That's the way my brain works. And I'm super grateful for that random stuff. Understanding the fact that I'm not going to turn things in on time. And my team knows that because I go on these deep dives that make me a more interesting person, hopefully.
What is your favorite word that you've learned in Korean so far?
This is super, 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 super basic, but I like the 안녕하세요 which just means hello, right? So it's like the first word that you learn. But what I love in watching different Korean media and everything is that everybody says it with this different energy, which I guess is the same as hi. And so I love trying to anticipate and hear the tonal changes and the mannerism changes and everything like that. And I kind of geek out about it.
That's a really good answer. I love that.
Okay, but I'm curious for you, what are some of the more random pockets that you've gotten into?
It's funny because I literally realized that my office is within arm's reach is a museum of fucking things that I've been into. But I mean, some of my more random ones is I feel like I have to contextualize again. But one of my things that I really struggle with is that when I do something, it is my thing. This is my new job. This is my new career. But because I have a background in marketing and design and that kind of thing, I always screw myself over because it's I can build the website and I can start the business and I can design the business cards. And so I'm just always why does everything have to have why? Why does it have to be so complicated? Can't you just like something?
Yeah.
But I guess some of my more interesting ones, I was a magician. I was a mentalist technically, I guess if you know how to do magic tricks, you're still a magician. But I was just about actually to book, I had booked my first national tour for my magic show right before the pandemic hit.
Wow.
That was weird. I play the hurdy-gurdy, which is a medieval stringed instrument that sort of sounds like the bastard child of a bagpipe and a violin.
Delightful.
Some of my deep dives are still things that I still have. I've been going to Shakespeare. I have 2 master's degrees in Shakespeare. But the thing that I love about being academic in that world is that there's so many offshoots. And so for me, out of that time that I spent earning those degrees, I got really into photography. I was interested in theatrical photography, but then I also I really like cosplay. And so costume design, costume construction. And then even more deep dively and specifically is I really like social history. I don't really care about Shakespeare, which is weird to say, but I don't. He's a very boring old white man. I don't give a shit what he has to say. What I care about are the people that went to his plays, who were an incredibly diverse and incredibly disparate audience that would come to this place and share this experience. And so what I always say is I'm sort of interested in the moment before the play and the moment after the play. So it's what were they wearing? What were they eating? What did they have for breakfast? How did they get a babysitter for the kids? Who took them home afterwards? How much were the tickets? All of that stuff. Yeah, Hamlet's great, but everybody's seen Hamlet. What I care about is why does Hamlet talk about, clothes so much? And it's because in Shakespeare's day, clothing was really expensive. A full suit of men's clothes costs about as much as a Toyota. So of course the prince is going to talk about clothes, as a symbol of he's just got shirts to throw around because he's it's stuff like that.
Yeah.
I know a weird amount of stuff.
It sounds very similar to myself. There's the surface level of what the thing ostensibly is, but then there's the deeper why, which is the part that is the wellspring of just
Right?
all the fascination. And so that totally makes sense that for you, like, you know, Shakespeare was like the outer layer, but then there was all of this stuff. And my master's was in fine art. That whole idea, same, is like, how are signs and symbols leveraged to talk about our values, to talk about our experiences, and what does it mean to visualize and externalize something that's an internal process? And that was the part that was always so fascinating to me, more than just the thing itself, which is why I really resonated with contemporary art, more specifically like conceptual art, is just like mind breaking. There's literally nothing. The art, if you think about it as an object, is literally nothing. It's the performance, which is ephemeral, but then somebody bought it. And like how you can have two people walk up to the same work and have completely different experiences is fascinating. Because then it's like, is it about the artist's intent? Is it about the reaction? Is it, I mean, you know, like people. I don't get how people aren't fascinated by people. And yet there are a lot of people who just aren't, you know?
One of the best pieces of advice that I ever got was from a magician. It was from this guy's name is Avner the Eccentric, and he's a famous clown, famous magician, has been working for years and years. And it's not his quote, but he was the person who I heard it from. But he was talking about how to be a good magician, how to hold a stage, how to be a good performer. And he goes, don't ever come on the stage and try to be entertaining. Be interested in what's going on. He's like, you never have to be interesting if you are interested. And I keep planning on getting that as a tattoo and I keep forgetting. But this idea of being interested, not being interesting, I mean, that changed my life. And I remember like, and this was only like a few years ago when I heard this. It was so funny because I remember I was sitting in this big room full of magicians and I was the only woman there. And I was the only person there under the age of like 25. I was very out of my element and I was very uncomfortable. And it's weird to just be like, oh my God, like I'm the only woman in this room. And he said this. And I was like, that is the smartest thing I've ever heard any human being say. Like I was rooting, I was trying to like, I was like, I'm going to forget ADHD. Oh, fuck, oh, fuck. And I'm trying to like write it down. I wrote it on eyeliner on my arm. Like that was because I didn't have a pen. And so I was like, and I'm looking around and nobody reacts. There was like no moment of like, oh my God, that was so smart and cool. And I'm looking around and I'm just like looking at people trying to get a reaction from them. And they all went like, yeah, that's a good point. And I was like, oh my God. And I realized, and not to speak ill of magicians, because there are many wonderful magicians and I am friends with many of them. But it's like, I think a lot of times that message doesn't land for performers across the board because we spend so much of our time trying to be interesting. Mm-hmm. We spend so much time trying to entertain, trying to put on the performance. One of the hardest things that I've had to do is to learn that I don't always have to be interesting. I can just find out what your favorite word is in Korean because I care about that as much as I care about, you know, talking about magicians.
Yes. Well, I love that. And it makes me think about like how this plays out with your content creation, because this is something I run into a lot. To wind it down, right? If for people who like maybe don't make videos or anything like that, is that there's an inherent performance quality, right? It's you on camera saying things and blah, blah, blah. But it's also this dance and interplay with other people. And I feel like the people who create content who get stuck, and I've even fallen into this category at different times, is you are in this camp of like trying to entertain, trying to dazzle, trying to be the most interesting, trying to compete. And then it's the moments when you're just like, okay, I'm just going to show up and I have this thing to share, that the connection and the resonance is really made. And it's a hard kind of line to toe, I think.
There are a lot of very big content creators, and there are creators who have millions and millions and millions, inconceivably more followers than I can ever dream of having. And a lot of people ask me, they go, well, why don't you create content like Charlie? Why don't you create content like this person or that person or whoever, you know? And I go, well, because I'm not that person, you know, I'm me. But one of the hardest things for me, especially in what I do, is that I work really, really, really hard and really, really carefully to make sure that I don't misinform and I don't miseducate. And I mean, there are a lot of videos that I have made and I go, if I didn't know enough about this topic, I could misconstrue what I'm saying. And so I won't post it. Like I don't post a lot of content because I don't want to be misinformative, you know, But out of that comes a significant loss of views and followers. Because if you post a 15-second video saying like, if you walk funny, or if you like the number 5, you have ADHD. And then everybody goes, oh my God, I like the number 5. Do I have ADHD? And then like it's just, and so it gets a billion views because it takes 2 seconds to say. And, you know, it's a completely relatable thing. Those people blow up and those are the videos that get seen or whatever. And then I'm over here doing like 3-minute breakdowns of like hormonal culpability in ADHD severity symptoms. And I do it fun and I try to be entertaining and I try to be engaging. But like 15 seconds and broad generalizations are far more easy to stomach and far more, I think, more accessible to a certain extent than like even a minute. You know, I try and really stick to a minute on most things. And that's where I get frustrated. And that's where I think I start to, I think sometimes get down on myself, which is weird because like integrity is really important to me, and representing myself and representing my community well is something I take so seriously. But it's like, well, I could just generalize here. I could just make the video, you know, every person with ADHD is psychic. Like what? You know, I could do that and I could get the views and I could build the audience and I could grow faster and it would be so much easier. I can't do it. And so then, you know, you start comparing yourself and you start saying, well, this person, you know, they had 1 million followers last week and this week they have 2 million followers and I only got 3,000 followers, you know, over the past couple of days. So I must be bad. I must not be as good. My content must not be as meaningful. That's where for me it really starts to get hard, because like the performing stuff is easy. Like I'm really good in front of a crowd. I'm really good in front of a camera, and that's a skill that I've had my entire life. Like I'm introverted as fuck. I'm so awkward. Like I'm so socially awkward, but I can perform, baby.
Yeah.
Like I've played Hamlet. That part's easy. The hard part is all of the background. You know, it's the comparing yourself and like, should I do the dance video? You know, should I make the fun thing that I feel really uncomfortable about? Or should I stick to something safe and know that that's, depending on how you look at it, cutting into profits, essentially.
Right.
That's one of the reasons why I admire you and I love your content so much, because you are so unapologetically yourself and you are so unapologetically just, you know, like about what you are about, but like clearly your audience sees that and you don't have to pretend to be, you know, somebody that you're not. And I respect the fuck out of that. And also that you just edit YouTube videos. What the fuck? That's so hard. How do you do that? How do you do that? I get overwhelmed. I'm like, oh God, this video is 1:30. Surely I will perish. Like, Jesus.
I appreciate you saying that and for being vulnerable, because I feel like that's the tough dance between impacting business and the fact that the algorithms don't reward nuance in any way, shape, or form.
Yeah,
and then this authenticity factor and staying true to yourself factor and like the way you look at that equation. The one thing I will say just really quickly is the key to YouTube video editing is that I don't do it. So
that's the system that works for me. I like that for us.
I've had amazing editors that I work with. I do know how to do it. And so that was a key piece for myself, was like really attuning what I like and being able to talk about that and, you know, work with editors in that before I hired an editor. But then I've been working with editors because it's like that. I mean, sometimes editing like, you know, like a 10-minute video takes like 6 hours. And you're like, oh no, this is not a good usage of my time. And then, you know, I can do that once, maybe twice weekly. No fucking way. So I'm relaunching my course, Magnetic and Video, where I'm helping people who want to use video to drive attention to whatever their thing is, their superpower, blah, blah, blah. One of the things that I really have created as like a framework mostly just came out of my own necessity, figuring out how to take myself out of like the cool kid track. Like the everybody has like a sob, that's so fucking random as a car choice. But like everybody's wearing the North Face jackets. I need to get a North Face jacket, like those, that energy, because I can totally slip into that. And trying to reframe things with my own internal criteria so that I can create from a place of feeling good about what I've created, regardless of how it performs. But then the trick is, how do you then match it with strategy that supports your goals? And that, you know, and that's fucking tough. It's fucking tough.
I want you to know I'm not laughing at you. What I am laughing at is that the story that you don't know, which is that very recently, and I'm still like unpacking the fact that I'm really embarrassed to say this, but like I got an agent and I got like a manager. Because like there's part of me that like it feels really like inauthentic now. Like, oh, Cate Osborn, she is like a manager. She's like like, and I'm like, no, I really suck at responding to emails on time, you know? But you know, part of that process is like they look at your social media and they look at your stuff. And I confused them so much with me as a person because they're like, okay, over on Insta, you talk about like your Renaissance festival stuff and, you know, lots of pictures of your cats, like plants. Okay. You're doing like plant stuff. That's okay. But then on Twitter, it's like basically nonstop D&D. Like there's a lot of D&D. Which, okay. But then you have a Twitch. You're a Twitch partner, but you don't play video games, but you're a Twitch partner. I was like, yeah. And they're like, okay. And also, how many subscribers do you have on YouTube? And I was like, I don't know. And they're like, oh, 40,000. What do you post? I was like, Minecraft videos sometimes. And they're like, what the fuck are you doing? And they're like, well, what do you talk about on TikTok? I was like, ADHD and kink. And they're like, what? And I'm like watching these people's like brains just melt. But then, and so we had this like big long meeting where they were like, all right, what the fuck are you doing with your life? And then so I actually realized like in this moment, like I had this like very personal breakthrough like out of this hilarious situation because I was like, yeah, dude, like, and also wait until you find out that like I have a bunch of sewing videos that I haven't published yet. Like, but that's it. That is the content. The content is my experience in navigating through the world with ADHD. And so for somebody without ADHD, looking at all of this, they go, what is this person doing? It's so not focused. It's so scattered. Like, who is your audience? And I go, my audience is not like, I'm not really trying to capitalize like the Minecrafters and the Renaissance Fair people. But if you want to like and subscribe to my channel, please don't not do that. I would like that very much. But for me, it's the people with ADHD who get it, who get you like plants and cosplay and you play the hurdy-gurdy and you're a magician and you're a streamer and, you know, and because I think that is such a common experience with people with ADHD that is like, I will never, ever apologize. And even, I think more importantly, I will never, ever choose. You can't make me. You will tear my curiosity out of my cold, dead fingers. That was the most interesting thing to realize was that ultimately, like the community that I had built, the viewers that I've gotten, you know, maybe there are some people who are just living and dying by the Minecraft content. If you are, who are you? How did you find me? But like the reason why I think my content makes sense and feels like nice to people is because I'm just being myself. Like I'm just doing the thing that makes sense to me at the time. And sometimes that's fishing nets and sometimes it's making really weirdly historically accurate bread, you know? And it's just like, that's just me. And I'm okay with that.
I'm so glad that you had that epiphany because it's so much easier to see other people's shit when it's not yours. You're just like too close to yourself with your own stuff. But
Right?
but that's exactly it, you know? And like the way I try to think about things is almost like the umbrella. And then there are things underneath it that you're like shielding from the rain. But like me as a human, what I'm putting out is like this umbrella that covers like a lot of things. And it's just that kind of, for the people who get it, they get it. The other thing that I will say though, and I'm curious if you've noticed this, is that the people who do really play to the algorithm, who stay super consistent, who do the thing, like there's a creator that I follow, her name's Sammy. She has the Let's Get Dressed videos. I don't know if you've seen it.
Is she that one with the cool belts?
No, but I love her too. I don't remember her name.
That lady is goals.
Yeah, I'm just like, can I grow up to be you? Because that would be great if I could just body snatch that situation. No, this is a separate human. She is based in the UK, probably like late 20s or something. And what is genius about her videos, I'm actually going to make a YouTube, it's very meta. I'm going to make a YouTube video deconstructing the genius of her videos. But the genius is that it's same, different. Same opening, same ending, same options, but because every day she's choosing a new outfit and there's a little bit of interaction, it's just like that cuddle blanket that you get to have every day, right? It's different enough, or like when you watch a movie you've already seen, but it's been long enough that you don't remember every single thing. It's just like you're comforted, but it's also new and different, blah, blah, blah. Her ratios have been astronomical. Like she is somebody with like 1.2 million followers on TikTok. Every single one of her videos
hits 1 million. Like I'm talking like 100% of the time. And that is great if that's what you want to do. But my guess is she's probably going to get burnt out. And I've seen people who are like, they get bored of doing the same thing. And that's just like a neurotypical person, will get bored of doing the same thing when you've been doing it for 6 months. And so me personally, knowing the way my brain works, I would much rather trade astronomical growth for long-term success on my own terms. That's why I love you and your content, is because it is just so clearly on your own terms. And you're like just doing it in a way that's so authentic. And just that very act, just that very way of showing up is deeply validating to people who are living in a world that's not built for them. So rock on with your bad self. Yeah.
Thank you. That's very kind of you. It's just funny that you say that, because my secret is right now I'm going through a horrible period of burnout. Because one of the things that sucks about TikTok is, and I hate, is how bad like the niching is, is like if you stray a hashtag out of place, they will tank your views. And so it's like really weird. Like my content is so hit or miss. And it's honestly really frustrating because it's so disheartening, right? For me, like you're talking about your how to get dressed. And it's just like, for me, like I would go to that page, I would be devastated, because it's like I have more followers than her. But like, some of my videos get 1 million views. Some of them get 2,000. Some of them get 100,000. Some of them get 10,000. And I'm so all over the place. And it's hard. It really is hard, because it's like I see these like super popular creators. And like one of my favorite YouTubers is Ryan George, who does the pitch meetings for Screen Rant. I look up to that dude so much, because that dude is like figured out his formula. He's figured out he can make content like overnight. Like his turnaround, his work ethic is insane. Like he's amazing, but it's like I could never do that. I could never do his job. It's because it's like he has the catchphrases and the format is the same and all of that. And I'm like, I could never do it. Like I respect him. I look up to him. I want to be him when I grow up, but I couldn't do that. It's really challenging, because it's like recently I realized that I was only talking about ADHD. I was talking about ADHD constantly. And it was because that's what was getting me views. But I'm like, I'm sick of talking about ADHD. Like I am so much more than that. And part of being, I think, much more than that is acknowledging that ADHD, like kryptonite, not kryptonite, A lot of ADHD is like, I want to talk about Shakespeare stuff because my ADHD is like the grad school, like going through grad school with ADHD. Like all of that is, I think, a worthwhile conversation to have. But boy, is it less flashy than like top 3 things you need to cure your ADHD.
Yeah.
It's a planner. They're all planners. Everyone is a planner.
I 10 out of 10 relate. And what's interesting is I am just coming out of a season of burnout that lasted from July up until a couple weeks ago, where I didn't make, and still I haven't come back to YouTube. Like it's, I'm like very, very freshly arcing out of that burnout. What has helped me actually, so I just put this together like yesterday, because it was something I used in photography all the time, is that Annie Leibovitz once said in one of her documentaries that I saw many years ago that her ratio is 1 in 36, which was the number of potential images you could have on a roll of film. She was like, if I get 1 off that roll, 1 in 36, it's a good day. I would tell that to clients. I'm like, we're not shooting for perfection here. If that's the best photographer in the world, working with people who get photographed every day, like we're going to shoot in like 1 out of 56, 1 out of 66. Okay. So like relax. We know we're going to hit it, but like, let's have fun in the process and like, let's give it some time and some leeway. It was just a couple days ago that I put it together with content creation. I was like, why am I expecting every single one to be a banger? Like who told me that that's how it should be? Like, fuck that. And the thing that's also so weird is that you forget that like those 2,000 views are real humans.
Do you have that problem where like, when I had like 2,000 followers, I was like, wow, 2,000 people, like that's amazing. Like that's great. And now it's just like, if a video doesn't get 100,000 views, I'm like, oh, I fucked up and I'm a failure. That's like some states. That's like every single person in Atlanta just showed up at my house to say hello. Like,
right.
And I don't think it's like an in like a gratitude thing. I think it's just like a comprehension thing,
I think it's comprehension, but it's also like the hedonic treadmill. Like that is the way we're wired, where it's like you get so used to what you have that you strive for more because you're seeking the dopamine or the good neurochemicals, and then you just keep going. And then, then pretty soon you're like, whoa, like myself 10 years ago would not be able to fathom what I've created. And yet I feel like it's not good enough. Like, what the fuck?
I never feel good enough. I never feel like I'm doing a good enough job. I never feel like I'm working hard enough. Like I was literally in bed at like 3:00 in the morning last night answering emails because I felt like I hadn't done enough to like deserve rest. And I'm like, this is so unhealthy. And it's like, I'm just getting to the point of like being able to like recognize it because #thanks therapy.
We love therapists.
Now I've started to like recognize how often I do that. And so much of it I think has to do with the big numbers, because it's like, it's so sexy to like pull up your thing and be like 5 million views. And it's just like, I don't need that to be happy, And that's the thing that I really have to work to remind myself, because when I first started acting, and I tell this story all the time, but like when I first started acting, I was so excited about Shakespeare and I was really excited. But there are a lot of like actors who've done this for years and years and years. And they're always, kind of just like, oh, it's just a job or whatever. One of the things that I started doing to like really keep myself in a place of like remembering that like not every show is going to be good and not every audience is going to be good and not every person is going to be amazing to work with is I would always look for the one kid, because in every theater, in any show, there's like one kid. And he starts in the back and he's mad. He just doesn't want to be there. And then by like the end of Act 1, he's like leaning forward. And by the end of Act 2, you've got him like so enthralled that like it's just like the best thing ever. When I started making videos, I started making them for that one person. I started making them for that one kid and the one person who needed to hear it. And so now it's like, it's so frustrating to go to somebody's page who has, like, I don't know, a smaller number of followers than I have. And it's like every one of their videos has 500,000 views. Like I have to constantly remember that like I'm making those videos for that one kid. I'm making it for the one person who doesn't know that, ADHD affects your hormones or whatever. It's something that I cling on to because it's one of the things that I think is like out of all of the unhealthy and sort of like guilt and shame about, numbers. That's like one of, I think, the healthiest ways to like kind of ground myself and center myself and remembering like why I'm doing this is for not fame and fortune and a ton of views, but because I wanted to tell people that they're not broken and they're not alone. That got really wandery in the middle. I'm so sorry. I was like, get it back.
There you go with the self-criticality, which we understand, but really no need for it because that was so impactful. I'm just thinking about myself as a human talking to you and like the way it feels for me, like that extends to everyone, no matter what they're doing, how they're showing up. We can get caught in this rat race, in this thing where we're looking externally for all these cues that are going to tell us if we're good, if we're enough, if we're worthy. And it is just coming back to that why. Like, what is that intention? And being able to really like lean into that from a place of curiosity and sharing and enoughness. That to me is like, if I were to distill, which is really hard, my personal cure for burnout, it is like taking that external and like sucking it back in and just being like, okay, like how do I make all of my happiness around this something that I own? Simultaneously, how can I make this not about me? Which was something in acting that I learned. How do you really do well in the scene? You put your attention on the other person, right? So it's like, how can I just talk to that person who's out there, who needs to hear this, trust that they will find it, whether or not it's like 100,000 people or 20 people, whatever it is. And how do I just let it ride, let it roll, share from a place of generosity and call it good? And that is like my constant gravitational force that I'm trying to cultivate in myself, right? Because like the gravitational force that exists right now is all external, is all flashy, all of that stuff. And I think of it as like a meditation, something I have to revisit, a practice and come back to. There is so much meaning in what we do as humans, in the interactions we have, in the way that we can impact other people. But it's like we're stumbling around all the time in the dark, like not able to see it. And so it's just like, I hurt my elbow. Fuck, that's a door frame, And it's like, no, you're in this space where like you can't even imagine the ripple effects that you're having just by existing, let alone producing and doing the things that you feel called to do. So can we just like find a way to feel good about it? And and like, it seems like a simple, easy thing. Of course, it's like totally not simple. Well, it's simple, but not easy to like practice every day. It's so easy for me from my vantage point to see that about you. What I'm excited for is for you getting re-engaged in that, because I feel the difference in having done that just recently for myself. And it's like, I'm a whole new human.
I love that. The shortest and most succinctest way that I've heard it described is my beloved, beloved husband, who is just so practical, so logical, just black and white. It's wonderful.
Mm-hmm.
He was like, I was complaining and I was like, I'm so mad this video didn't get a bunch of views. And he goes, well, are you proud of it? What do you mean? He goes, well, did you like have fun making the video? I was like, yeah. And he goes, did you like it? Do you think it turned out well? And I said, yeah. And he went, then who gives a fuck? And just walked away. And I was like, okay, all right. Yep. Okay. That is valid.
You need to give him a mic that he can just drop and walk away.
I know,
whenever.
right?
Yeah.
Just like put it on a thing around his neck so he can just wear it and pick it up whenever he needs it.
Yes. Clip it on just long enough that it can hit the floor so it has the impact, and then, remain attached.
That's $1 million idea. Like a retractable mic that you just like pull off of your belt and then you can drop it and it just snaps back to your belt.
Feel free to steal it, because as genius as that idea is, I will not execute on it. Will you?
I'm literally about to make a TikTok about that right now, and I'm not kidding.
Oh my gosh, I love that. So G Speed round, the only rule is that you cannot overthink it, right? So it's just what comes to mind, blah, blah, blah. If we were to take a peek into your office, what is the most random, weird artifact that we would pull out and be like, interesting?
I have my hurdy-gurdy. I also have a Muppet version of myself. That's pretty fun.
Oh my gosh.
I do have the original props from Ships of the Northern Fleet. Those are fun artifacts from a television show that definitely and totally and for real existed.
I was going to say that doesn't mean anything to me, but I can tell by you it sounds good, but I'm a noob when it comes to like...
encourage you to
cool
read
stuff.
The New York Times article that was written about it.
See, yes, I knew I was missing out, which is like hashtag the huge. Okay, so early celebrity crush.
This one's like a real vulnerable one, actually. I never had celebrity crushes growing up. I always thought that there was like something like inherently wrong with me because like, all the other girls would like always like crush on Leonardo DiCaprio and all this stuff. And I remember very specifically faking a crush on Leonardo DiCaprio when Titanic came out because I wanted to fit in, but I like never crushed on celebrities. And it was only a few years ago when I was really doing a lot of the work that I've been talking about, like with like understanding sex and intimacy, that I realized that I'm demisexual. And so like that was like one of the first indicators that I remember of like realizing that I didn't think about like sex and sexuality like as the way that like the majority of folks do. And so so my real answer is I never have, because I'm demi, and that was like a whole learning experience.
Okay, wait. So isn't demi what used to be called sapiosexual, or is it something different?
Sapiosexual has kind of been co-opted into like red pill, gross, like incel culture to a certain extent. The idea behind demisexual is less about like having an intellectual, like, oh, you have to be as smart as me for me to be attracted to you, which is sort of like what sapiosexual has become. And for me, it means more of like, I really have to have a connection with you. Like, I don't really do one night stands. I don't think about people sexually until I really start to get to know them. And so for me, it's more about building like respect and partnership rather than being like, you have to be smart to fuck me.
Yes, that makes sense. Taking it out of the hands of the dude bro. White cis hetero dude bro. I vibe with that. Okay. What is a failure that turned out to be a gift?
My plan was to be a nun. And so I'm really glad that plan failed, because that was not the move, I don't think, it turns out.
Wow. That is shocking.
That's like one of my favorite facts. Like I like literally like went on like convent visits and I had like an order picked out and I was like picking like my name. Like I was like really invested in becoming a nun, and then it turned out that I was pretty gay.
I mean, is there a way that you could bounce further from that initial idea?
I know, right? Yeah. I don't know.
Just full of delightful contradictions. I love it. Okay. What is the one thing, like when you're feeling like slumpy, like cannot get my energy together, what's that one thing that you can go to, whether it's a song, whether it's an action, whether it's a human, like what's that one thing that you can reach out to that can like bop you into your Eunice?
Dunkin' Donuts.
Is it an emotional thing? I'm not a big donut person, but like, are they the best donuts?
It's just that you can get an extra large iced coffee with like 5 extra shots of espresso and nobody asks any questions. It's more of that than like anything.
Got it. Yes.
But
okay.
I was gonna say a song. I would say that because I'm pretentious and I'm fancy. Beethoven's Ninth Symphony is, I truly believe, one of the most incredible achievements that humankind will ever produce.
Wow. I get the 5th and the 9th confused? Which one is the 9th?
The 9th is Ode to Joy. 5th is dun 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 dun.
Okay, yeah. So thinking about this higher version of yourself, reflecting like higher spiritual, whatever you believe, like the most loving version of yourself, looking down on like the you that you are. What would you say that you are the most proud of?
Downstairs in my kitchen, the wall that I usually film against. Originally, there were like 3 shelves with some succulents on them because I like plants. One day, somebody asked me if they could send me a letter. I said, okay. And so I gave them my home address because I was a very trusting person at the time. And they sent me a letter. In the letter was a card, and they said, thanks for helping me not kill myself in the card. So I hung it up. After a while, every so often I would get that question, can I send you a note? Can I send you a letter? And I started hanging them in my background. At this point, where I am in my life, and after opening a P.O. box, because safety first, you can't see the wall anymore. And what people don't see is that underneath the wall, well, behind the wall in a closet, there's, at this point, 3 crates of notes and of letters and of cards and of, just different things and stuff and gifts and stuff that people have sent me. I would say 80 to 90% of them usually come with some variation on you've changed my life, or you saved my life, or you changed my relationship with my husband or my wife or my daughter or my partner or whatever. And that's weird, but I'm proud of that. All I ever wanted to do was roast myself for having a pile of boxes in my dining room for a year. Then it took me another year to get rid of that pile of boxes after that first video. And in the time it took me to get rid of that pile of boxes, I had gained a community of like almost 2 million people who all just get it. And that's cool. So I'm proud of that.
I have goosebumps. I can tell, just like knowing you for the little time that I have, that like you receiving like compliments and like ingesting that stuff is like low key, high key, awkward as fuck.
Touché.
Yes. I appreciate you sharing that. And like, that is such a beacon of possibility for people who are like questioning whether or not they have anything to say, questioning whether or not they're interesting enough, like beautiful enough, any of those things that, yeah, you showing up as yourself has had this like tectonic impact in such an incredible way. And it doesn't need to be that huge, even with that one that was there. To keep it on that same vibe, what is a totally underrated dance move?
I know that it's not cool anymore, but the dab. I think dabs are funny. I loved it when you could dab. I loved it. So it was just fun because you'd just be talking and you're like, ha-ha. And it's just like this thing and you could just do it. And it was so fun. And then just as quickly as it came, it was snatched from me. And now it's not cool anymore. And I'm really sad about that.
Gen Z snagged it and made it chuggy as fuck. And then now when we try to do it, yep. I feel like I've never been able to do it with a straight face and like with any ounce of coolness. So.
You can't dab and not laugh. It's so dumb. It's the best thing. I don't even know how to do it right, but it's like that one.
Whoa! Yes.
So like that one, I think that's great because I can't do it at all. Like I'm not cool enough. I'm too old. I'm too neurodivergent for that shit. It's the head for me. It brings me. I will do that like 20 times a day. I'll just sit and just do that because it's like you have to like freeze at the end, and it's so silly. It's beautiful. I love it so much.
Oh my gosh, what is so bananas about that is I just went on a trip to London in November to celebrate my amazing sister who graduated with her master's, and we were on the Underground, and I was just being a dork, and I did the dab and the whoa. And they're like Gen Z, super cool kids. And so it's just my sister like laughing at me.
Just cringing.
Being ridiculous. Yeah, we'll have to put it in the show notes so people can join in the ridiculosity. I love that. Okay, so Pan, ultimate question, fill in the blank. I feel most powerful when?
I feel most powerful when filling in the blank is when I'm wearing a set of like really bougie, expensive lingerie. Like I have a lingerie problem. And it's so funny because like nobody, because this is how I dress. I was like, I dressed up for this. It has a dinosaur on it. Like, you're welcome. Like that, I'm not a fancy man. But I love lingerie. There's just something about it. It's just sexy and like feminine, but in like a way where like you just get to own your body and whatever feminine means to you. Like, it's just not, and it's soft, except when it's pokey, and then it's evil, and just it should be burned. But it's just, oh man, I love lingerie so much, and everybody always makes fun of me. It's so unnecessary. It's the most unnecessary thing, and I'm just like, give more. I need more.
I love that it's like the perfect all or nothing manifestation, right? It's either like sweatshirts and overalls or the most expensive lingerie ever.
Well, here's the thing. It is usually both at the same time. Not to overshare, but I actually took it off because I took a shower, but I was wearing very fancy underwear under this exact outfit all morning because I just like, it makes me feel powerful. And so I was like, I had like to do a Twitch stream, and I like had a really bad night last night, so I like wasn't feeling myself. I was like, fuck it. So I opened the package because once again, I have a fucking problem. I just have a box of unopened lingerie like a fucking sociopath. And so I like put it on, and I was like feeling myself, and I was like, what should I wear? And I was like, fucking hoodie, let's go. Like, this is it. This is how I live my life. It's
that
ridiculous.
Makes me so happy that just like lit up my life, knowing that fact. that is authenticity out of 10, self-care, self-expression out of 10. Like that, yeah, that just makes me so fucking happy. Thank you for making my week.
You're welcome. My pleasure.
Okay, last one. What does it mean to be living into the boldest, truest version of yourself?
Humility, grace, compassion, and accountability. That is what I think. Because I think like it, a really easy answer to that would be like, oh, like fearlessness, or, oh, being really bold. But I think that it's more fearless and more bold to be able to say that there are always going to be smarter people in the room than you, and that sometimes you are going to be the asshole, and that you do have a lot to learn and a lot of things that you can improve. And even in the places in your life where you are really successful and you have things, your shit together, there's always room to learn and grow and work to be better. And so I think approaching your future self with humility and saying, I don't think I'm ever going to be perfect, and approaching your future self with accountability and saying, but we can work on the things that we need to work on. And then kindness and compassion, approaching your future self and saying, yeah, we're not going to be perfect, but we can work on it. And we're going to be kind to ourselves and kind to myself about, like our failures and the places where we feel like we let ourselves down. That's what I think it is. I don't think it's anything too complicated. I think it just means being honest with yourself.
Oh, I love that. That is such not that you did it for the gold star, but that is such a great answer to that question.
Well, so you're saying I did a good job?
Yeah, not to make it about external validation, but you low-key, high-key did the best. So you hit it out of the park.
I always feel like really confident for like the first 30 seconds. And then I start being like, am I talking too much? I feel like you're talking too much. Why are you saying so much? You really need to wrap it up. What was I talking about? Like, that's what's going on in my head the whole time. So yes, just know that. It's not eloquence. It's just panic.
Oh, well, thank you so much for coming on. This has been like one of the most delightful, but also like rich and vulnerable conversations that I just so deeply appreciate. I love how you're like literally squirming as I'm saying this too, which is like
No,
totally
it's okay. I have a fidget that I hide when people are saying nice things to me, but then I dropped it in my crotch like right when you started saying nice things about me. It's fine.
Because I'm like, that's what I look like when I'm not masking, right? Like whenever somebody's saying something nice to me, I'm like, you know, I'm trying to get better at like allowing myself to receive it. But yeah, it definitely activates that, like whatever those stories are. Mine is when I was 5, twirling baton and like out in front, just razzling and dazzling everyone. None of the other girls liked me. And so I decided in my 5-year-old brain that if you're like too sparkly, too out there, too loud, too special, too whatever, you won't be loved. And so whenever somebody is like saying kind things or whatever, that little kid in me gets activated, even though what they're saying is like connection and love, you know? And it took me a lot of years to even understand that is what's happening. And it will probably, I mean, I don't know. I would love to think at some point, I'm going to get to the top of that hill where it's just like, oh, please, I love it from a humble place. That's amazing. Thank you. Honoring, receiving. But that probably won't be my life path in all honesty. So
terrible at it. It's fine.
Yeah. Okay. So very last thing, like everybody is in love with you.
Oh God.
You're welcome. Squirm away. No, I mean, so what are you working on that you're excited about that you can draw people to, the podcast, all the things?
I'm Cate Osborn. I go by Cate Osborn on all the social media. I also have a podcast that is actually very near and dear to my heart. It's called Katie and Eric's Infinite Quest, an ADHD adventure. We talk about life with neurodivergency and depression and navigating life as neurodivergent adults. We also, I know. We also play D&D. So it's like a little twofer. It's like a mental health podcast sometimes and sometimes D&D because, again, I have ADHD. So it's called Infinite Quest. You can find it wherever you listen to podcasts. We also talk a lot about like sex and kink and relationships. And things that I'm excited about. I'm going on a national tour this year. I'm going to be going to some conventions. So if you want to find out more about that, if you want to find where I'm going to be stopping along the way, you can visit infinitequestpodcast.com or you can visit cateosaurus.com because that also exists now. So
yay! Oh, you are awesome. I fucking love you. Yes, that will be happening. And I love your podcast, by the way. Like it is, we didn't even talk about it, but like it's just so validating to like hear people talk in a way that resonates, you know? And and what I love, this is how I know it's good, is that I cannot listen to it at 3.5x speed.
Oh my God, that's the highest praise.
That's how I know. I'm like, whoo, I gotta bump it down. Like we gotta go at 2.5. This is a banger here. So yeah, I love that. Thank you so much for coming on. You are like, you're amazing.
Thank you so much for having me.
Oh, see, I told you that, that conversation was so fun and so surprising and so lovely. And what I was personally grateful for is that you could probably sense energy-wise, they were just in this little bit of a place where there was just like this heaviness. And I totally resonate with that because I've been spending so much time in that place. And yet I feel like I recently sort of turned this corner. And what I love is the idea of how infectious our energy can be, right? And I felt that my energy and my reframing just rubbed off a little bit and changed somewhat of the tone of things. And I have had people do that for me. And it was just such a great way to like honor each other and the conversation. And I'm just so grateful that you are all on this ride. We are over a year old and it's fucking exciting. I love you. And I hope this week you go out there and you just rock it all with your full capacity, your full vibrancy, your full fucking amazingness that you bring to the table. As always, if this episode resonated with you, let me know and send it to that friend that's been like in the back of your mind. Like, hey, check this out. I think you'll dig it. And I will see you next week. Bye.